The Buckeye State Sheriff's Association is providing this podcast as a public service for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host or guest of this podcast are their own and may not reflect those of the BSSA, employees of the BSSA, or any of its officials. Any reference to a specific product, entity, opinion, issue, or other such item does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation thereof by the BSSA. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association.
My passion is really to find a way for us to improve what we do and start being the change, the thing that helps individuals suffering from mental illness and addiction, help them navigate those problems where they can live in our community.
Welcome to the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association podcast, where we'll introduce sheriffs and deputies across Ohio. During this conversation, you'll get to know the men and women serving you and hear all about the good work being done in the Buckeye State every day. Now let's join your host, Paulding County Sheriff Jason Landers, and today's special guest.
Welcome to the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association podcast. We're here today with Sheriff Kandy Fatheree from Summit County, Ohio. I'm Jason Landers, the sheriff in Paulding County, the host of today's podcast. We want to welcome in from across Ohio from where I'm situated, and we're going to travel over to Akron in Summit County. Welcome in, Sheriff. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Sheriff. How are you?
I'm great. I tell you, it's we've lived through this cold Arctic chill that we've had over the past 7 to 10 days here in the flatlands of Paulding County. But today it's not too bad. As a matter of fact, when I was getting in the car to come out to the radio station, I thought this might be a good day to walk around town and just kind of get out of the office a little bit.
Well, it's not so bad here. We're supposed to hit about 32 degrees today, so that's encouraging.
Yeah, it is. That's for sure. Well, I'll tell you, let's get things started here. The focus of this Buckeye State Sheriff's Association podcast is to connect sheriffs and deputies with the communities that they serve. So we're going to get started with you today, Sheriff, if that's okay. Tell us a little bit about Kandy Fatheree. Tell us where you're from, where you grew up, and just talk a little bit about who you are and where you're from. I
was born in Belmont County, Ohio, Bel Air. So my family is all on the Ohio River. Belmont County, right across from Wheeling and Moundsville, West Virginia. So I'm a little bit of a hillbilly. When I was 5 years old, we moved to Summit County. My dad, the rest of my family was all coal miners, and my dad didn't like the idea of going underground. So we ended up coming to Akron because of the rubber factory and all the jobs that were here as a result of it. So I've been in Summit County since 1963. And I grew up in Springfield Township, which is a suburb township of the city of Akron. And I'm one of 6 children. I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And I'm the second child, so I first girl born and surrounded by a bunch of boys in the family. I didn't end up going into law enforcement, although I wanted to from a very young age. I didn't end up going into law enforcement until after I was in my middle 30s. I had graduated high school, I got married, I had a child, I got divorced, and I found myself in my middle 30s at that crossroads in your life where, you ask yourself the question, first of all, what I've been doing is not working for me. Second of all, what everyone else wants me to do doesn't feel right for me anymore. I really want to do what I would like to do for the rest of my life, which was go into law enforcement. So as a divorced single parent of a young daughter, I applied to the sheriff's office, raised money, and went through the academy. So February 2nd, it will be 33 years since that happened, which I can't believe it's gone by so fast.
Man, time flies, doesn't it? I tell you, it's interesting, as I learn about folks just kind of hosting this podcast. When you and I first met, it's probably been 10 or 12 years ago, I suppose, through the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association function somewhere along the line, not knowing some of these things about you, but it explains, I guess, growing up with all those brothers, your toughness. And what I mean by toughness is you could just tell back when you and I met and just getting to know you over time, you have that toughness about you. And I don't necessarily mean that as a physical toughness, but but just a mental toughness. Like you handle yourself well in the environment that we are all in when we're called into to law enforcement, and when you chose to get in that at that point of life. Probably your upbringing with those brothers and just the way things happen. You talked about, having a child and going through that time in your life where you had to figure things out and get really tough, right? To scrape around the coins that it took to put yourself through the academy at that stage in your life. To me, that's toughness.
My mother would agree with you, quite honestly. Mentally tough, yes. Probably more so than even my brothers are, but that would be because of the fact that between them and my cousins, which were all boys, I fought like crazy. So physically, I was in some pretty good fights with them, and mentally and emotionally, you learn to deal with some of the things that come along with being around a bunch of boys.
I guess so. So 33 years, man, what an accomplishment that is for any law enforcement officer, and no matter where you're located. But for you, you talked about going to the academy. Talk to the listeners a little bit, if you will, about where you attended that academy, and then where'd you get your first opportunity in law enforcement?
So I went to the Summit County Sheriff's Office Police Academy. And after I graduated, I became a special deputy, but I genuinely needed a paying job. So I ended up going to work for a small village in our county called the Village of Lakemore. I was the very first female that they had ever had, a female law enforcement officer. I worked for them for 2 years on patrol. And then during that period of time, I got married. I married one of the guys I went to the police academy with. And he worked for the sheriff's office. And he encouraged me to come back and apply. So I did, and I was hired back in 95 to the Summit County Sheriff's Office, where I have been continually since April of 95.
Let's stop right there and tell the listeners, if you will, and as I've started to ask this question in a podcast, it's interesting what I can learn from this. Talk to us about Summit County. Now, when we talk about Summit County, my attention goes to the city of Akron, but there's got to be much more than that. Talk to us a little bit about the landscape of Summit County. What kind of towns, cities, villages do you have around there, and your industry? Now, you mentioned earlier the rubber city when you go back to that, but what's there today, Kandy, in 2025? Talk to us about Summit County.
So I always get the square miles messed up, but I think we're somewhere around 450, 475 square miles. We're a long county. In fact, I think we're the longest county in the state as far as the length is concerned. We have about 535,000 residents now. We were the rubber capital of the world at one time. Now it's really geared more around polymer. We still have Goodyear. They still have their headquarters here. Goodyear's headquarters are here. Gojo, Joann Fabrics. Those are just a few of the ones that are from this area. Rubber obviously is no longer a big industry here. But overall, I would say that the majority of the industry in Summit County is smaller businesses. As far as the landscape is concerned, it's predominantly urban environment. It goes from urban to urban. We have some farm areas, not a lot anymore. I think there are I believe there are 28 communities. I think I have roughly 26 to 28 police chiefs that I deal with. The largest city, of course, is Akron. And it has just around 200,000 residents in it. The sheriff's office patrols. We contract and patrol with 4 areas in our county: the city of Greene, Coventry Township, Twinsburg Township, and Northfield Center Township. We have the Akron-Canton Airport at the bottom end of our county, down close to Stark County, and then on the northern end of the county. We have a couple of casinos. We have MGM and the racinos, and we also have the turnpike that runs across the top of our county. So it's very diverse. We have a growing population of Nepali, Bhutanese, Congo. Quite a few have moved into our Cuyahoga Falls and northern Akron area. So we've become very diverse, and we're fortunate in that we have the University of Akron right in the center of the county as well.
When you break down your county, you talked about a couple of things I made note of. You talked about Goodyear and you talked about the airport. Now, is this where the infamous Goodyear Blimp is housed throughout the year?
Absolutely. The Goodyear Blimp is over the county frequently. I mean, it's a normal sight for us. You see them out and about on most days. And then the Blimp hangar, which is enormous, is still down by the Akron Fulton Airport in its original location back over 100 years ago when it was built. It still sits there. It is large and looming. It's amazing to see it, and to stand in front of it it's just enormous. I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe that they were able to build. I think it was like 5 to 7 blimps back to back on the inside of that place. So it's multiple football fields long. And it actually does. It actually does rain inside of there. It gets moisture and it does rain inside of the facility.
That's just absolutely crazy. And, when people listen to this podcast, obviously you're going to listen to it in Summit County and across Ohio, but this thing will stretch across the country and across the world if you have internet service and you have the mediums of Spotify or Apple Podcast, or you go to our YouTube channel, the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association. And the one thing everyone's going to be familiar with, if you're not familiar with Akron and the other things you talked about, Joann Fabrics and such, is going to be the Goodyear Blimp. I think that's really cool. Let's talk a little bit more about you and your professional career, if you would, Kandy. Walk us through your different positions or ranks that you've held throughout the last 33 years.
So I said I started out special deputy for a very short period of time before I became a Lakemore police officer, where I worked on patrol. I left there and came to the sheriff's office, and I worked as a deputy sheriff. As a deputy sheriff, I worked in the jail in corrections because our jail has law enforcement in it. We don't have correction officers. So as a deputy sheriff working inside security in the jail, I also worked on patrol. I worked in our court services, and I did a short stint in our detective bureau. Then I got promoted to sergeant, and I ended up working, starting out in the jail, and then eventually over in our court services area as a sergeant. A few years later, I was promoted to lieutenant. I worked in the jail for about 6 months before I went back to court services, and I stayed in court services from a lieutenant into a captain. When I was made a captain, I was an administrative captain, so I worked up with the sheriff on the administrative floor, working with our budget and finance. I supervised that division as well as running the courthouse and our civil division. It was as a captain when our sheriff said that he was going to retire that I chose to run for sheriff back in 2020, and I was elected and took office in January of 2021. So I was reelected this last fall as sheriff, and so this is the beginning of my second term as sheriff here in Summit County.
Boy, starting in your second term, Sheriff, and it just goes fast, doesn't it? I mean, that first term when you were just getting in there, we'll get into the size of your agency and how many people you oversee on the other side of the break. But when you think about that first term, so much of those first 4 years is just getting things organized the way you want to see them as the chief executive law enforcement officer of your county. Doesn't it just fly by, and now you were just reelected to your second term?
In the blink of an eye, it was over. And I couldn't believe, number one, how much work is involved with being the sheriff. And then number two, how fast everything happens. In some cases, things just were like flying by. And then in other things, like a few of the initiatives that I wanted to do, I couldn't get them done fast enough. But you're right. Sheriff, it just goes by so fast. When you talk about some of the things, so in my first term, 3 weeks in to being the sheriff, I have a deputy pass away in his sleep at home. 6 weeks after that, I lose a deputy again to COVID. So in my first 2.5 months in office, I lose 2 deputies, both passed. In 2022, we end up, Akron has a officer-involved shooting, and we end up with riots. And so now I'm dealing with a summer full of riots. And then in 2023, I have another deputy pass just a couple weeks before he's due to retire. A second deputy a few months later, only 6 weeks on the job, dies in a motorcycle accident. And the week after that, I had a special deputy that was ran over by a truck. He did survive, but he's had a host of health issues. It's truly a miracle he lived. So in my first term, there was all of this in addition to starting out with COVID. So, you talk about the whole gambit of your first term. It was just incredible, all the things that were happening, how fast things happened. And as I said, the amount of work that it takes to be a sheriff, especially a sheriff of the 4th largest county in the state of Ohio, it was quite a bit. And it's an adjustment from being a line staff supervisor to being, the head of the agency.
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And when we look across Ohio, there's 88 counties, and you look at the folks who have been before us as elected sheriffs. There's current elected sheriffs that we all know that are examples for us. That we just had a host of retirements at the end of the year. We have 31 new sheriffs in Ohio starting January 6th, and so many of those folks that have retired, and you and I know a lot of them that we look up to that help us get through when we're newly elected. And figuring out the way that we got to do business. But I want to go back with you just real quick and hit on this toughness again, because I remember this conversation with you years ago when we were talking about you attending the FBI National Academy, and to be able to complete that academy. If you would talk to the listeners just a little bit about what that commitment is and how mentally tough, and there physically you have to be tough, right? Because physical fitness is a lot of what that National Academy is about. But talk to the listeners a little bit about that experience, and then how that kind of give you a jump start into your leadership within the Summit County Sheriff's Office, preparing for you to become the current sheriff of Summit County.
So the FBI National Academy is designed to build future leaders and help to reinforce and current leaders. So you'll have some police chiefs and sheriffs, but most of the people that attend are up and coming. So it's really designed for leadership. It was held in Quantico, and it is a 10-week educational experience. And you're right, it is both physical as well as mental. So you attend classes all day long, 5 days a week. There's homework assignments. It's just like being in college. I had a roommate and I had suite mates. But it's 10 weeks long that you live at Quantico. And I had PT twice a week, and then once a week, the entire group, plus all of the FBI agents and teachers, all ran together in an experience every single Wednesday while we were there. So every week we ran a little bit further than we did the week before, and it's all about physical conditioning and mental toughness. So from the beginning of the 10 weeks, it's called the Yellow Brick Road, but it's a series of experiences, and eventually you get to the end of the Yellow Brick Road, and you have a physical fitness endurance test that you also have to pass, along with all your college classes that you're taking. So I earned, college-wise, I earned 19 college credits while I was attending that 10-week class. All of them on leadership and things that are related to running a law enforcement organization. But then the physical part, the Yellow Brick Road, they take you out and they drop you off in the middle of, just on the edge of the forest on the Marine Corps base, and you run the same obstacle course that those 18-year-old kids do. You are crawling underneath a barbed wire on your hands and knees in the sand, and you're not protected, so you end up coming out all bloody and scuffed up. You're rappelling down the side of a mountain. You're going over this big rope ladder. You're walking on logs and going through doors and stuff that are created. So you have an obstacle course. Then you have ours ended up being a 6-mile run back to the Quantico headquarters. So this whole thing it's a little over a 10K with Marine Corps level obstacle course, and you've got to complete the whole thing. You do it, they drop you off in groups, and it's designed for mental, physical toughness, but also leave no man or woman behind. So as I was going through this, one of my buddies that was there from Texas, when he came across the rope ladder, he came down and apparently he injured his foot. We later found out it was broke. But he and I ran with him back to the base, and he ran on the broken foot. So it just shows you the mental toughness and the physical conditioning that's required. I lost 10 pounds while I was there. I was probably in the best physical condition of my whole entire life at the age of 50.
Well, that's hard to picture, because for people that know you, I'm not sure you have 10 pounds to lose. But I tell you, when I was recently there this past summer, I was selected to be a part of the National Command course, which was held for my group, session 7 at the FBI Academy there at Quantico, and it was the first time I'd ever been there, and it was what an experience it was. So that course that I attended was for sheriffs across the country who employ less than 50 full-time members, which encompass 80% of sheriff's offices across this country. So 80% of the offices employ less than 50 full-time people, and that's what that's designed for, is for basically rural small sheriffs to be able to expand on their leadership abilities and network and share how things work within their respective organizations. And while we were there was the National Academy session was taking place, and we were able to talk with a few of those folks in the boardroom or the cafeteria area of the FBI Academy and learn about what they were going through. And I'm telling you, it's impressive in the fact that you completed that. And there's several law enforcement officers in Ohio that have, and other sheriffs that have, but I commend you for your efforts there. Let's turn a little bit, Kandy, if we can, towards the Buckeye State Sheriff's Associations. Talk to the listeners about any positions or involvements that you have within not only BSSA, but for yourself, talk a little bit about the National Sheriff's Association and any affiliations with that group you may have.
So as a deputy, I was the Northeast District Deputy Director for the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association. I became involved in the association in 2006, and I've been actively involved ever since. It's an incredible organization to begin with. There's a vast amount of experience, and any situation that you get into, the nice thing is that you can reach out to anybody across the state and you can get assistance from them. So I was the Northeast District Deputy Director for a couple of years before I ended up becoming sheriff, and now I'm the Northeast District Sheriff's Director. So I sit on the board of directors for the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association, and I am one of the representatives for the Northeast Ohio. In addition to that, I was elected to the position of the National Sheriff's Association Board of Directors. I'm active at the national level as well. And again, as you spoke about sheriffs nationally, it's so impressive when you are active at both a state and national level, the things you learn from other sheriffs, the shared experiences, and how extraordinarily helpful everybody really is in helping when you've got a problem. I've got 3,081 sheriffs across the nation I can reach out to help me with that, whatever problem I have. So being really active in both organizations, as far as a sheriff is concerned, in my opinion, is critical, both your state organization as well as your national organization. There's just so much that in law enforcement, every situation, although one situation may be similar to another, every one is unique. And sometimes you get into some really unique situations that you genuinely need somebody else to kind of help you think your way through it and some options. And the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association and the National Sheriff's Association both afford sheriffs that opportunity.
Yeah, it sure does. And so much about what we do, what gets us through it is kind of what you're talking about those connections and talking with sheriffs. In the onset of my tenure as the elected sheriff, I had the likes of Jeff Gray, who recently retired down in Mercer County, or John Linhart, who is retired again, but he was reelected after many terms as a sheriff in Shelby County. He was reelected when I was elected in 2012 and got to know him through that. And Mark Vasilishin in Wood County, which is probably the closest, I would say, large county sheriff to me, and just the experience he has or the resources that they have. Sheriff Matt Triglia down in Allen County, just talking with some of these folks that are regionally close to me that can help through situations. And you expand it even further than that when you talk about some of these national organizations like the NSA, and going out to the Midwinter Conference, which is next week, and going to the summer June national conferences through the NSA. It's all about building. There's so much about, I should say it's all about, but there's so much about just making connections, establishing relationships, and those resources. So when we do have unique situations or scenarios, we know who to contact, and it's very important. Let's talk about the 33 years that you've been in law enforcement, Kandy, and talk a little bit about any changes that might stand out to you that you've seen in your career. And we know, there's a lot of things. Typically, the one that comes out from tenured sheriffs is computers and technology. But anything, not to steal your answer, that jumps out to you as a change in law enforcement that you've seen over your career?
Well, besides technology, and that's across the board, I would say that the biggest thing that I really am beginning to see change is I see law enforcement moving much further back to a genuine community-based relationship. In many organizations, you kind of, I think that we went through, we were community oriented, and then we kind of went through a period of time where it was just kind of status quo for a while. And I think that what I'm seeing now is that law enforcement wants to get out of the car and interact with the public so much more, that we as law enforcement officers feel that need to connect with the people that we serve. And I see that connection just improving and getting greater throughout my entire county. That's probably the biggest change, because community policing was really strong at the beginning of my career, and then it kind of like died down. You didn't hear a whole lot. You did things, but you didn't really hear a whole lot. Now we've got people going back out on bicycles and horses and getting out of their cars, and they're interacting with people, and it's okay to stop and play basketball with the kids. It's all of that is just that reconnection. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I see now. And I know within my own organization, because I lead a little differently than some of the sheriffs before me, but that's because I'm the first woman. So, we have a little different, sometimes a little different thought process. And so I'm very, very conscious and aware of relationships, of relationship building. And so my entire organization and many of the police departments in our county are really getting back to basic police work, basic communication, and really getting to know the people that we serve.
Yeah, and I think that's really important when you touch on community policing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more after the break, but how that plays in to even recruiting. We're about halfway through the podcast right now, Sheriff. Let's go ahead and take our ad break. This is funded by the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association. We're going to go ahead and pay the bills with the break. We're going to come back and talk more about the Summit County Sheriff's Office. We're on with Sheriff Kandy Fatheree from Summit County, and we'll be back right after this break.
This podcast is sponsored by the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association. The BSSA is in Columbus, Ohio, and was established in 1931. The Buckeye State Sheriff's Association was formed to perpetuate an efficient organization of Ohio sheriffs and their deputies. BSSA provides an exchange of information pertaining to the duties, methods, and official practice of its members. The association also exerts such influence as may be necessary to bring about and preserve legislation in harmony with the needs of enforcement officials and the safety of the public. The BSSA supports the efforts of this podcast to promote Ohio sheriffs and deputies and their mission to serve and protect the citizens of Ohio.
Welcome back to the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association podcast. I'm Jason Landers, a sheriff in Paulding County. We're on with Sheriff Kandy Fatheree in Summit County. It's over in Akron, Ohio, and we're going to continue on talking about some things in her career. And the one things that I want to ask you is there anything in your career that stands out to you? Any particular, maybe it's a case or an experience that you had over your tenure at the Summit County Sheriff's Office? Anything that just jumps out you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, working in the courts, I had a lot of really high-profile cases. There were two of them that really come to mind whenever I think about something really big. The first one was the Cindy George, Zach Safino case. They called it the Beauty Queen and the truck driver. That it's been on TV before, but basically what it was she was alleged to have she was married. She had an affair with one man, and then she had an affair with another man. The first man she had the affair with, she ends up having a child. He starts to blackmail her. She starts an affair with another man, and she convinces him to murder the first guy. So his trial, during that murder, his trial is just it was huge. We had news media everywhere trying to navigate all of the news media and trying to be cautious to make sure that he was safe, because quite honestly, we were a little concerned that there may be a hit set out on him. And so that was just a big case, the John Safino and Cindy George. Cindy later, she was also tried, convicted, went to prison, spent 18 months there, and then it was reversed by the Ninth District Court of Appeals. And then the second case that really comes to mind was the Craigslist Killer, and that was Richard Beasley. And that was an interesting case. So if anybody's listening, you need to look it up. He actually uses Craigslist to find victims that look just like him, because he's been arrested by Akron. He's been released out on bond. And then he has a previous case from years ago from Texas. He doesn't want to go back to Texas and Texas prison. So he goes on Craigslist. He looks for people, men who are down on their luck and who look very similar like him. And then he lures them down into the Marietta, Noble County area on the premise of he has a farm down there that he's going to have them run this farm, and they can live there for free. They just need to take care of this farmhouse and this land. And these guys, and so he tells them to bring all your possessions, and he interviews them, him and this other young kid that was only 16 years old. And long story short, he takes them to a wooded area. He kills them. He assumes the identity. He takes all their possessions, and he sells their possessions for money. And he ends up killing like 5 people in a couple of week period of time. And it became a fascinating case. And the logistics of trying to deal with that case, and it was multi-county. It was Summit County. He killed one here in Summit County. He killed several down in Noble County, but he interviewed them down in Marietta County. So we had all of these counties and the FBI involved in it. Absolutely fascinating case. Those were the two that in my career that stick out the most because of the complexity and how unusual that they were.
Those are interesting. I remember hearing about the Craigslist Killer. I have to do a little bit more diving into that on my free time, and the Cindy George case made a note as that as well. Let's talk a little bit more about your office, Sheriff, and tell the listeners about the size of your agency. Now, this is fascinating to me because I'm one of the smallest counties in the state of Ohio, and you are, I believe, the fourth largest by population. Talk about your office here a little bit.
So we have 405 employees. 339 deputies is what I have out of that 405. The rest are civilian employees. They're all support staff. And then I have 84 special deputies. And currently we are 28. We have 28 vacancies for deputies. So I need 22 deputies and 6 supervisors. So we run typically between 400 to 500 altogether if you add in all the special deputies that we have. We're well over 500. That's just been, that's actually down from previous years. We, at one point, were well up over 600 employees as a sheriff's office. So on a daily basis, though, I manage 405 full-time employees and 84 special deputies.
That's interesting. I just yesterday answered a survey. You are down 28 deputies. I employ 25 deputies, and that's just deputies. I have corrections officers, communications officers, some specials and things of that nature. But just quite interesting the contrast from our agencies. Now, being down 28 deputies, Sheriff, are you doing anything unique regarding recruiting? Do you do I kind of like searching at times recruitment videos, trying to steal some ideas? We've produced a few of those ourselves. Career days, anything like that you do, trying to fill the void of those 28 deputies you're down?
So we've done all of the typical things. We've done videos. We're out on social media. We go to job fairs, but we also go to high schools. I started in the high schools trying to recruit from that point forward. I personally go to many of the high schools in our county to talk to teenage kids about law enforcement as a profession. And since sheriffs can have law enforcement officers at the age of 18, I am trying to encourage some of them to apply when they get out of high school if they're not going on to college. We've had a couple of them. I've never hired an 18-year-old. We've got a couple of 20-year-olds. They've done very well, but we're very cautious as to maturity is a critical issue. But so I'm talking to high school kids. We are trying to plant that seed now for the future. In addition, I told you earlier, we have a large Nepali, Bhutanese, Congo community that's growing in our county. And I have been working very hard in those communities and recruiting. And in my first 4 years with the sheriff's office as a sheriff, more than 50% of the people that I hired were women and minorities. So I am intentionally targeting women and minorities, and we have been very, very successful with them. So it's a little bit of everything, and I recruit every single place I go. If I'm in a restaurant, quite honestly, if I'm getting my nails done or if I'm getting my hair done, everywhere I go, the dry cleaner, I am constantly looking at people and trying to recruit.
Well, I think it's important, and we have to, specifically when you're in it. I've been very fortunate where our turnover has been minimal as of late, but I'm always looking, and my wife would tell you if you asked her, this just happened within the past 5 days when I'm watching people and I make statements to Jamie from time to time about I would hire that person. I watch their customer service, if you will. I've hired waitress staff that I see handling groups of people or things that I think might manage people well working in corrections. And you are always recruiting in different ways, and I'm always just kind of watching and having ideas of who I might be able to reach out to if I had a situation arise. And you talk about hiring 18-year-olds, and now for me, I've been able to employ a couple folks and hand select 18-year-olds that I think would have the maturity and professionalism to do the job in corrections as civilians. But for you, if I remember correctly, you only employ peace officers in your jail. Is that correct?
That is correct, and they're allowed to be peace officers. I have to issue them a gun, but I start them out in our jail. Our jail holds right around 800 inmates, and although we've been able to keep it down to about 500, and between 550 and 600 is where we stay on a regular basis, but we can go up to over 800. But I try to keep our brand new recruits, in fact, everyone, I try to start them in our jail. And the reason why I like to do that is, number one, it gets them comfortable being around people who are different than them, who grow up different than them. And it helps them to learn to communicate with difficult people. We are a direct supervision jail. So if you can work inside a pod with 48 men and keep control and have normal conversations, it teaches you so much. And I think that's part of the reason why we have so few uses of force when our deputies leave the jail and go out on patrol. We have very few uses of force because they've learned how to communicate. They also learn, and it's hard to describe it, they learn the feeling. You can walk in on a pod and you can just feel the energy, whether or not it's good or bad. It's pretty it just becomes a awareness that when you're on the street, you can feel that when the situation is changing, you feel that atmospheric change. I just think it makes them better cops, makes them more aware of what's going on around them, better interviewers, better communicators, and also they learn how to de-escalate. So. And those are just a few things, but we always start ours out in the jail.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned a lot of those things that are important that I think about as well. And I started in the jail, and our jails are, they look a little bit different or a lot different, specifically by population or the way they're designed. But regardless of where you might work in a correctional facility where you have folks in confined spaces, you have what we have to deal with right now with, specifically with the mental health that I chalk up a lot of what we deal with to substance abuse, be it methamphetamine or prescription pills or whatever that might be, that translates into some form of mental health type of situations that we have to deal with. But you really do become good at dealing with people in those environments. And then if you can prove to those folks in the clientele that visit the local hotel, if you will, you learn how to talk with people. You learn how to be consistent and treat everyone the same. And I will tell our folks when we hire them that you might be here for a DUI, driving under the influence, or you might be alleged of murder or anything in between. And we treat them all the same, and their actions sometimes dictate different response from us. But in our small town environment, recidivism is something that happens here. And so when you form that relationship as a corrections officer in that controlled environment, then when you do get promoted to the patrol side, if that's where you turn out being, there's a good chance you're going to deal with those same folks again. And you already know who they are and how to handle them, and they know how you're going to be and how you work. And so that all just plays together in the criminal justice system, which makes being a sheriff or working in a sheriff's office unique versus some of our city police departments or village police departments or even the state highway patrol and what they're tasked with doing. When you come to the sheriff's office, and you've talked about it, Kandy, because you've worked in all those environments, we take the call into our communication centers if we manage those like I do. You're sending the deputies and the detectives to handle the situations, and then ultimately if they're incarcerated, you're there, and then we're directly involved with the court process. So it's just unique, and if you bring someone in at the ripe age of 18 or 20, 21 years old into our jails, they get that whole criminal justice environment, and sometimes like yourself for 33 plus years.
Well, that's the hope. When we hire them, I hope that they make it all the way, stay with the sheriff's office and make it all the way through to retirement, where they can enjoy a wonderful retirement. And you're right, it is a career, but I think it takes a unique individual who genuinely wants to help people, where people really are important to them and relationships are important to them. I think that's the kind of person that ends up gravitating towards the sheriff's office because, as our incomes, what we pay our deputies, they're dictated a lot by the county. And so we don't always get to pay them what they can make at some police departments. But they stay with us because they have that. It's just an attitude that's different and opportunities that are vast. You become a cop, you go to a police department, you're on the streets, and then you might get to patrol. And if you go up the ladder, you might eventually someday get to an administrative supervisory position where you can sit at a desk. That's pretty much all you've got. Sheriff's office, you have the jail, you have patrol, court services, civil process, investigations. You can go up the ladder and as a supervisor and work in all of those. Again, as a supervisor, in addition to the fact that you've got all the specialty units, your SWAT team, your crime team, your dive team, drones, and in our case, we have a mounted patrol. So there's and then we have canines. There's like, I think I have like 14 different specialty units, and it just makes deputy sheriffs, in my opinion, they're just so much more experienced and rounded, and so much more opportunity for change in their life. Especially as you get older, if you're a deputy and you've gotten older, you don't want to be out chasing people and wrestling around on the floor and in the mud and the snow. So you end up going into court services or back to the jail.
It's interesting. We talked earlier in the podcast about meeting people from other areas, specifically for you at NSA or for me when I've been in different statewide organizations or with the Ohio Chiefs of Police Association, just different. It's a little bit different task in the criminal justice system when you're involved with the office of sheriff. And you talked about it. You just make such a more well-rounded employee that way. Well, as we start to wrap things up, Sheriff, what's your passion? Tell the listeners in Summit County that's going to listen to this thing, what drives you every day when you get up to go back into that office and continue doing what you're doing?
Well, the first thing is I love my job. I love the sheriff's office. So I think that just loving it makes a little bit of a difference. My goal is to make the Summit County Sheriff's Office the premier, most well-known professional organization in the country. That will always be the line that I want them to go for, and so that helps me to drive the education, the training, the things that I want all of the people at the sheriff's office to have. Because this is not just about law enforcement; it's about the civilians as well. It's all of the employees. And then, as far as a flat-out passion, I'm very passionate about mental health. I think that, as you said earlier, we deal with so much mental health issues, and the country has failed our people who are suffering with mental illness. And it doesn't matter if the mental illness is a chemical one or if it was one that was brought on by drugs. The bottom line is there are people out there suffering with mental illness, and law enforcement is the one that is always interacting with them, and sheriffs specifically, because they're dumped in our jails because there's no place else to put them. And so my passion is really to find a way that sheriffs across the nation, as well as me here in my own little county, for us to improve what we do, improve our jails, and start being the change, the thing that helps individuals suffering from mental illness and addiction, help them navigate those problems and come back to an acceptable lifestyle where they can live in our communities and not constantly be coming back to our jails, not constantly getting in trouble. So mental health is a big passion of mine. I just don't think that, I just think it's a shame that the sheriffs have to go the route that we've had to go. But we have to do something because what we've been doing isn't helping. And if the rest of the country is not going to help us, then we've got to help ourselves.
Yeah, no, we got an uphill battle there, that's for sure, when we're talking about mental health. But I'm glad to hear you talk about that, and I think that it's something across this country that definitely we need to stay on top of. Well, is there anything else that we left out or any other topics that you would like to discuss?
No, the only other thing that I will say to you is I said that after leaving Lakemore and coming to the Summit County Sheriff's Office, in between there I got married. And my husband and I are going to share our anniversary in March, 31 years. It was interesting, both of us being deputy sheriffs, working for the same agency. It was interesting I met him going through the police academy. We got married. We have been together, married for 31 years. And I found it interesting that in all those years, we've never had a fight. We've never raised our voices to each other. So, and we fully understood each other's day. So when one of us came home and we were chirping about something, the other one just automatically listened. And interestingly enough, my husband's been retired now for 11 years. And he still listens to me come home and chirp. and he still asks, the typical questions that good cops ask, but always interested in what is still going on in the sheriff's office and in our community. And so I think that that's something, for me, that's something that's very unique, because I just don't see that many law enforcement officers that marry another law enforcement officer and stay married.
Yeah, it's a tough profession to be in. And, I remember when I went into my first year of college taking law enforcement classes and then jumping to the police academy, there was a lot of talk about you got to know what you're getting into. The divorce rate in this profession is, at the time, I think it was above 50%, and potentially, maybe even here locally, it was around 50% with some of the folks. And I've seen that change a lot in my tenure in law enforcement here in Paulding County, that's not the case. And I don't know if that's really changed across the country, but when you have a supporting spouse, in your situation, as you talked about, and particularly in my situation, understanding what we do every day and understanding, when we do come home and how we might be acting or some space that we might need or some different things, man, it's so important, as people and for those relationships, but so important for the law enforcement officers to have good careers themselves. And it's great you brought that up. Well, Sheriff Fatheree, I'd like to thank you for being a part of today's episode. We would like to thank the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association for their sponsorship. For Sheriff Kandy Fatheree, I'm Jason Landers. I'll be right back here next month featuring another Ohio sheriff or deputy on the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association podcast.
Hi, my name is Bob Cornwell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association, located in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for listening to this podcast today. It was brought to you by the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association. With this podcast, we are striving to introduce you to sheriffs and deputies from around the state of Ohio and recognize their great work they do every day for the citizens of Ohio. For more information about our organization, Google Buckeye State Sheriff. Thank you.